Hi, I'm Matt Rosu. Welcome back to our series where we're examining false assumptions in economics that are all designed to create a better picture for government intervention than what is truly optimal. This is part of a series. The initial video in the series lays out the case for why this is so important. If you want more on that, go to the video linked in the description. Very short overview is that a bigger government reduces economic freedom. Economic freedom leads to higher incomes, higher well-being, higher life expectancy, and a host of other good outcomes. This means with more government involvement, we see the opposite. We see less economic freedom, lower income, lower life expectancy, and more bad outcomes. The false assumption we are examining today is the assumption made that consumption spending is only as good as government spending in terms of helping the economy, or put another way, government spending is just as good as consumption spending. Now, many of my colleagues who teach economics will, maybe when they first hear this, will think, wait a second, I don't ever remember making that assumption. But it's actually made all the time. It is a default assumption and a definition right in gross domestic product equations. So when you're teaching gross domestic product, which GDP is the amount of goods and services produced within a specific area, we often talk about the US, right, a country, within a specific area in a specific period of time that are sold through markets. The equation for GDP, and this is taught in introductory macroeconomics, is GDP is defined as consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. So by definition, consumption spending is equal to government spending in terms of gross domestic product. Therefore, when economists are talking about how to fix the economy, often they'll say, well, you could go one of two routes. You could try to cut taxes, which puts money in the hands of consumers who will spend the money, or you could try to increase government. And by increasing the government, you're also increasing GDP at the same time. And according to the definition, of course, that's correct. And there are economists that will just argue, it really doesn't matter. Either are going to boost the economy. But in terms of the well-being of society, it's absolutely a horrible assumption. And it makes a case for a bigger government, which we don't want. Especially we don't want a false case, because this really is that's what this does. By embedding this assumption, by making the assumption so ingrained, those who hear this assumption, read this, study this, will think it doesn't matter. We can increase government and it will be just as good. But why is this assumption false? Now, many of you will know this, but just do a thought exercise here. If you had one extra $100 to spend, where would you spend it? Well, based on our kind of principles of consumer utility, consumer behavior, you would spend that $100 on exactly the products or services that give you the most bang for the buck or the most utility per dollar. This is just common sense, right? You are going to spend your money in the way that makes you happiest. And every other consumer, if they got $100, is going to spend their money in the way that makes them happiest. Now, what about the government? Well, they aren't tied to that principle. I mean, they're just simply not tied to it. Government is an external entity that is considering how to spend money on what they think is best. And most government workers are truly trying to do their best to spend any revenue they receive on the items that indeed will maximize well-being for society in their views. I think most are trying to do this. However, there's a few key caveats. One is they don't know everybody's preferences. How could they possibly spend money accurately according to what everybody wants? They can't. They simply can't. We all know they can't. The second thing is there are some inefficiencies here. Because, of course, some of that money that the government is spending is for the bureaucrats and the politicians and everybody who's figuring it out. It's for their salaries. They're being paid themselves to figure out how to spend it. So some of the government spending is just going to pay their salaries, not to the actual things that might make people better off. That doesn't even tie in all of the issues we've talked about with government failures, where governments can really actually just screw things up, bureaucratic inefficiencies, abuse of power. I have a different video that covers that. But even when government it's not wasteful or inefficient, it is unrealistic to expect that spending by the government will lead to the same contribution to your well-being as an individual. Now, there are some items that people could look at and say, well, you really are probably going to need a government to do that particular thing. And that's a valid point. There are some items, but government spending is a massive portion of the economy. I mean, it's often equal. In terms of GDP, you take an average amount people pay in taxes and an average amount they're paying for their house or whatever they're renting. Many people, that's equivalent. It's pretty unrealistic to think that the spending on government is leading to the same happiness as the spending by consumers. So this is a false assumption. But this false assumption that government spending is just as good as private spending makes people think that government can be bigger and society will be just as well off. And we know with a bigger government, we're going to have less economic freedom, lower incomes overall, lower life expectancy, all of the negative consequences that go along with less economic freedom. Thank you for watching to the end, for those who are still here. If you're here, please consider clicking like and subscribing to the channel for more content. This is part of a series. There will be more videos like this coming out discussing misleading assumptions in economics. I also make a number of videos discussing where economics is found in pop culture. So if you enjoy this content, please subscribe. And if you either agree or disagree, please leave a comment. I love to hear from you. I love the comments from people love it. And if you dislike it, be respectful, but I enjoy a good conversation with those I disagree with. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video.